Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. We are officially into the draft prep time of year. Greg has been grinding the tape. It doesn't stop from regular season to postseason, and now getting into the college players. But you've been watching college guys casually, Greg, for some time, yeah?
Yeah, but now I'm deep into it. I'm in the deep freeze, Buck. And the way I do it, it's just I have to feel good about the way I do it. So I watch a lot of games, a lot of plays. I don't watch 40 or 50 plays. I watch a lot, and it takes time. I mean, I love it, but it takes time.
Certainly. And Greg is a one-man scouting service, so we're appreciative of the time that he puts in. And with the combine right around the corner, of which both Greg and I and the rest of the NFL world is going to be at next week in Indianapolis, we'll start to get a better picture of where these guys might land. Greg, I think wide receivers is going to be an interesting discussion throughout the course of this draft. A lot of teams needing skill position help. Certainly the Tennessee Titans here locally need to add some youth, some speed, some competency around DeAndre Hopkins, because right now everything else in that group is a question mark. Traylon Burks and Kyle Phillips, we're still uncertain, and DeAndre Hopkins at 32 with only 1 year left on his deal. They need to add some top-end talent and quickly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just a shame that Traylon Burks has fought injuries throughout his first 2 years. And again, I'm not suggesting that if he didn't, he'd be a superstar, but you'd like to see what he could do if he could practice regularly, if he could play regularly. Hopefully that happens this year and he gets an opportunity to work with Will Levis, beginning when they start the OTAs and the mini camps and all that, and they can develop some kind of rapport because you are dealing with a big kid who can move. And, going back to when he came out, 6'3", 216, very, very impressive player coming out of the SEC. I liked the pick when they made it. Obviously, up to this point in time, I'm not one who uses the word bust, and I don't think that's fair at this point given the injuries. But he was a middle first round pick, and at some point, you do need to see production.
Yeah, there's a certain level of expectation, and he has yet to achieve it.
Yeah.
And with a new coaching staff and a general manager that didn't draft him, that level of urgency has never been greater.
That's a great point. Everything changes when you get a new general manager and a new coach. Yeah, everybody starts from scratch. The fact that he was a first round pick doesn't mean anything, other than from a cap standpoint. But as far as a play on the field standpoint, it doesn't really mean anything to Brian Callahan.
So we'll see how they manage the existing components of the roster at a later date. But since you've been watching wide receivers here in the last couple of weeks, Greg, obviously the place to start with the wide receiver position in this draft class is Marvin Harrison Jr., coming out of Ohio State this year as a junior, 67 catches, 1,200, just north of 1,200 yards, 14 touchdowns on the year. There is no question, at least from the untrained eye, that he's the best wide receiver prospect in this class. What's your evaluation of the player?
Yeah, I believe he is. I believe he's one of the best wide receiver prospects we've seen in a long time. I mean, he has an elite traits profile, no discernible weaknesses in his game.
But not generational, not generational.
I will not be using that word, no. People will start to nitpick his game. And again, he has not played in the NFL, so he's still a prospect. And that's why I said he's one of the best prospects. Could he get to the league and struggle with, something? Sure, he could. He hasn't played in the league. That's the highest level of football. But you're dealing with a guy that has great size. He's got high level athleticism and movement. He knows how to run routes. I'm sure much of that comes from an early age with his dad, Marvin Harrison, who's a Hall of Famer. I think the quickness he showed at the top of his route stem for his size and his overall length, to force corners to move off their spot or get their body turned. I mean, he dictated the creation of space on his routes. And that's what you want to do as a receiver. You want to dictate the creation of space so you can separate cleanly. And you could see on the vertical routes, he had a sudden explosive burst that allowed him to run by and get on top of corners. I mean, there's not really, like I said, I don't really have a weakness in his game. He's smooth. He's subtly sudden. When you're 6'3", sudden is a relative word, but he's subtly sudden. It seems deceptive because he's so long. Got great hands, catches everything. He's a wide receiver one. He's not only is he the number one wide receiver for me in this draft class, but I think he steps in and is a wide receiver one for whatever team drafts him.
Deployment is something that we can't know because we obviously don't know what team he's going to end up with.
Right.
But the way that they used him at Ohio State, is there anything that stands out in particular about how he might fit best at the next level, or is this a wide receiver one, as you said, right out the gate?
I think he's wide receiver one. I mean, he did line up in the slot at times. He's certainly a location versatile within a formation. He likely transitions best as what we call the boundary X, the single receiver to the short side of the field. He's got everything to win. Those receivers tend to face a lot of man coverage, even in zone concepts, especially when there's three receivers to the other side. We say the boundary X on the backside of trips. So they very often get just man coverage. He can beat man coverage. He's, like I said, I mean, I really do not have a discernible weakness where I say, oh, that's something he must work on or it's going to be a problem. As I said, though, he's still a prospect, but he's a fun guy to watch.
It's not a successful season at Ohio State if you lose to Michigan, and that was the way that Ohio State's season ultimately went, though he certainly produced in that game at Michigan this year. 5 catches for 118 yards. Was there a game on tape in particular that you would recommend to the audience who's going to start looking at these guys that you enjoyed watching, or is it all just, highlight after highlight for Marvin Harrison?
I mean, look, just to be honest, the way I do this is particularly with receivers, so I can see every single route that not every single target, I should say, is so I watch all their targets, Buck. That's kind of the way I do it. And then I pick up games as I go when I watch other players, on a particular team, so the way I do it, if a guy has 160 targets, I'm watching 160 targets. So I don't just pick 4 or 5 games. So I've seen in both in 2022 and in 2023, I've seen every one of his targets. So it's hard for me to answer your question specifically, but I've seen if he's had 300 targets in the last 2 years, I've seen them all.
The easier answer is you could put on any game and watch Marvin Harrison, know that he's going to make plays. However, teams have them stacked, Greg, and not necessarily going in order of how the league looks at them. But Rome Odunze at Washington is going to be another high-level wide receiver prospect that's going to be a part of this draft class. There are several. We're going to cover 4 of them, the top 4, today in some form or fashion. For him at Washington, coming out as a junior, 6'3", 215, 92 receptions, 1,640 yards, 13 touchdowns on the year. What did you like about Rome Odunze's game?
Yeah, another guy I've seen all his targets from the last 2 seasons. So now you're dealing with another guy that's tall. There's a lot of these receivers are big now. Another guy, like Marvin Harrison, who's in the 6'3" range. Another guy with higher level traits. He's got size, he's got movement, and he can catch the ball really well. He's a very strong contested catch receiver. He's got exceptional hands. He snatches the ball away from his frame. He makes those contested catches both on the sideline and in the middle of the field. He can contort his body to adjust to back shoulder and poorly thrown balls. Another guy that can line up outside and inside. I would say he's more smooth and fluid than sudden, but he just makes everything look very, very easy, Buck. I wouldn't call him a true vertical dimension in the sense that he has great long speed, but his size and his stride length and his uncanny ability to track deeper balls allow him to be a factor, even if he's not created meaningful separation. Because as I said, one of the true strengths of his game is his contested catch ability. And that cannot be overstated. That's become a really meaningful part of NFL passing games, particularly with that boundary X, as I said, who gets the one-on-one. A lot of quarterbacks throw to the one-on-one. And there's a lot of good corners in the NFL, but if you can make contested catches, that has high value in the league.
Make the quarterback right more often than not in those situations. Certainly that was the case for DeAndre Hopkins and Will Levis here this year. That Washington offense was so much fun to watch, Greg, and we'll talk about Penix at a later date.
Yeah, I will say this though. They do run a lot of NFL style route concepts. This is not, what you think of as a college offense with a lot of quick throws and short throws. Obviously, they've got some of those. Everybody does, but they attack at the intermediate and vertical level. So you saw Dunze run a lot of intermediate and vertical type routes.
Which is the question that, or I guess the direction that I was headed, because that's not always the case, right? We spent so much time talking about Tennessee's offense last year, for example, with Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman. That's not the case at Washington. I know Ryan Grubb is going to go on to coordinate the offense in Seattle. Good to see prospects running NFL concepts and the kind of stuff that you're going to see from NFL teams to get the best possible picture of them before they head to the league.
Without question, it's a great point.
So looking down the list, like I said, however you would stack them, Malik Nabers, the LSU wide receiver, LSU, a couple of wide receivers coming out this year. 6 foot, 200 is what they have him listed at on the official website for the Tigers. 89 receptions, just north of 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns on the year. Greg, if we start to get around the 7th overall pick, and I know the Titans need offensive line help, but I love the idea of Malik Nabers in two-tone blue. What did you like from the tape?
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of people, as you know, Buck, I'm not a list guy, but people always ask me that. He would be my number 2 if I had to make a list.
Okay.
Again, another guy who I watched all his targets from both 2022 and 2023, and I really like Malik Nabers. I mean, number one, he can play outside and in the slot, a ton of experience, both, in both areas. I think he's got a complete receiver skill set. I mean, you wouldn't say that he's purely explosive, and I think that he needs to be a little more refined in his route running. At times, I felt like he relied exclusively on his physical ability to feed press and run routes, and needs a little more refined and subtle technique to manipulate corners. But that can be taught. But I really like this kid. I mean, he's really competitive. He's physical. There were times with his run after catch presence and aggressiveness and physicality, I thought of Deebo Samuel. He worked all 3 levels of the defense. He did show some body lean, some feints, things that he needs to continue to get better at, but it was there in his body. And I thought one of the things that's often overlooked, and I had a number of great conversations with the former Bengals and Ravens receiver, TJ Houshmandzadeh, about this. And he brought this to my attention. And as soon as he said it, it was, a light bulb went off in my head. And Nabers, what he can do is he has the ability to stop on a dime. When you're a receiver and a corner for that matter, you need the ability to stop. Very often guys who are burners, and Nabers doesn't fall into the burner category, but very often, the 4-3 guys, those guys, they struggle to stop. They're very fast in a straight line and they can run away from people, but they struggle to stop. And Nabers was a master at being able to stop. And that's a very overlooked trait for a route runner.
Certainly, we brought up Hopkins a couple of times here, but that's what I think of when I watch DeAndre, just his suddenness, and even at his advanced age as he's getting up there, his ability to stop on a dime basically and make those kind of plays, let the corner go by him or whatever he needs to do. However he's implementing his skill set to create that additional separation that he might not otherwise have the top end speed at this point in his career, or really at any point in his career, to make. It's such a valuable thing to be able to create that separation where the margin for error is so thin at the pro level.
Yeah, and my sense is when we get to the combine, if he chooses to run, he's going to run at some point. Nabers is not going to be a 4.35 guy. In fact, he could be a 4.48 guy, but he plays at a good speed. His play speed is very good. And there's a physical presence to him that I really, really like. I mean, I think he can step in from day one, be a strong contributor, maybe even be your guy from day one, but I really like him. Like I said, if I had to make a list, he would be my number 2.
That LSU offense had some studs on it this year, so it's real easy to just look across the formation and talk about Brian Thomas Jr., who's also going to be coming out of this draft class. Much bigger player at 6'4", 205, 68 catches, 1,177 yards, 17 touchdowns on the season for the Tigers, and also a junior coming out. How would you kind of juxtapose those two players and their skill set?
Yeah, I think Thomas is an ascending player. I mean, I think there's a lot to be cultivated and developed with this kid. He's long, he's smooth, he's got accelerating speed to run by and get on top of corners. There's no question he's a vertical dimension, in my view, anyway. I mean, he seemed to consistently find that extra gear as the ball was in the air. Very fluid mover, which kind of belied his size and length. And guys like that you don't usually call sudden or explosive, but there was a very easy gliding feel to the way in which he moved that had a deceptive feel to it, a deceptive quickness to it. He may be a little bit of a work in progress as he makes the transition. You didn't see a lot of route diversity. I wouldn't say there's a true physical element to his game. So there might be he might begin as kind of a specialized type of receiver who needs to kind of develop, as I said, and cultivate. But he has home run ability with his size and his stride length. That trait's always in demand. And I believe there can be much, much more to his game. I think that a player that came to my mind was when I was watching him, but I think Thomas might be just a little juicier vertically, but that player was T. Higgins. Thomas Higgins might be just a little thicker, but I think Thomas might be a little more vertically explosive.
Well, when you talk to wide receivers coaches, Greg, at this point and over the course of the last couple of years, where do the conversations typically end up around the position? How much more specialized it's become? Really, I mean, since the advent of 7-on-7, quarterbacks and wide receivers have become more and more specialized. So this is not a new trend.
It's become less so and more so. I mean, and I know that seems like a weird answer, but I think with the diversity and multiplicity of formations in the NFL, the idea that one guy lines up here, one guy lines up here, one guy's in the slot, I think that's changed. Now there's exceptions. There's certain guys that, hey, you look at and you go, that guy's a slot receiver. He can't really line up outside. But there's fewer and fewer of those guys, Buck. There's so much more multiplicity of formations. I think one of the things that always comes up when I talk, and I remember having a great conversation with the receivers coach last year at the JW Marriott in Indy. It was, during last year's combine.
Where everybody hangs out, that's Starbucks. You can't go by it without seeing it in the NFL.
But it was a guy I've known for years, and he's considered one of the better wide receivers coaches in the league. And he spent a lot of time, we talked about this, talking about the boundary X, the single receiver, because you see so many teams now when they're in 11 personnel, meaning 3 wide receivers on the field, that line up in what we call 3-by-1 sets, meaning there's a single receiver to the short side of the field and 3 receivers to the wide side of the field. That boundary X receiver, that guy has become so critical in the NFL because he's going to get a lot of one-on-one, or I should say a lot of man-to-man coverage. Even in zone concepts, what teams do now defensively in zone is what we call boundary lock. So they'll take their boundary corner and he'll match up man-to-man, even though the rest of the coverage is zone. So, that boundary X receiver is so critical because he has to be able to win versus man coverage. And if you don't have that guy, it's very, very hard to have a really good passing game.
Life gets a lot harder at the NFL level, and certainly there's so much talent all over the place with these wide receivers. Greg, I know you've watched, you said about 15
I've probably watched about 15, 18 receivers. I think I've done 7 quarterbacks. I'm working on offensive tackles for obvious reasons. So we'll get to all this. When you watch offensive tackles, you got to watch full games. So it takes time. You can't just watch a few plays here and there. You got to watch games.
Well, God knows, Greg, after 5 seasons of them, since they let Jack Conklin go, I'm not tired of talking about offensive tackles around here just
yet. They're
That's...
probably, it struck me, just from watching their tape this year that they might need some.
Look at you. You couldn't even get through that without smiling.
I know.
So we'll do the top prospects at every position. With these podcasts over the course of the next couple of weeks and months as we get ready to the draft. But I will ask you, Greg, at the end, since we're only talking about the top ones, of the 15 guys that you've watched that you may have some additional thoughts on that the audience might be interested, or a name to keep an eye on throughout the course of the process here. at the wide
Oh,
receiver position?
I loved Lad McConkey from Georgia. Loved him.
Okay. Is like, I don't know if we don't have to get into, is he a first round pick? Is he not a
No,
first
I don't
round
get
pick?
in. I don't get into that.
Right. But that's a discussion that started. What about his skill set stands out, Greg? Because I don't want to call him a curiosity. He's more than that. He's a very skilled player. But I've started to pay more attention to him as I've started my draft prep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have measurables for him because I believe he was at the Senior Bowl, so he's 5'11 and a half, 187. So he's not a little guy. And like I said, I think that a lot of people will pigeonhole him as a slot receiver, and maybe that's what he'll be in the league. That becomes team and scheme specific, Buck, as you know. I mean, there's a lot of players who you think of, well, he can only do this, and then he goes to a team and he's more than that. The more I evaluated McConkey, and I want people to understand what I'm about to say. The more I evaluated McConkey, the more I thought of Cooper Kupp when he came out of Eastern Washington. Now, I know people are going to say, oh my God, you're nuts. Cooper Kupp won the Triple Crown, blah, blah, blah. I'm talking about when he came out of Eastern Washington.
Before he was Cooper Kupp.
Before he was Cooper Kupp. And I liked him a lot coming out of Eastern Washington. And I remember being at the Combine that year, and he ran a 4.62. And I remember people in the Dome, because I'm fortunate enough to be in the Dome, kind of looking at each other going, oh boy, now he's going to be a 5th, 6th round pick. And I think he was a 3rd round pick, maybe. I can't remember exactly.
And 4th, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
And he's become Cooper Kupp. Now, some of that could be a function of team and scheme. Obviously, he went to McVay's Rams, and McVay runs a beautifully orchestrated offense. There's a lot of guys like that. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he was a 4th round pick. Okay. Now, we think of Amon-Ra St. Brown now as a great receiver, but he's not Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase or Devontae Adams. He's in a great scheme, and he certainly has excellent traits, but he's not at that level when you just talk about pure physical talent. And Ben Johnson in Detroit, again, like McVay, they run a really beautifully orchestrated scheme that presents clean throws and gets St. Brown open. And this is no knock on him, but I think people have to understand that there's so much that goes into why guys become volume receivers who put up numbers. And when I mentioned McConkey in relation to Kupp, I'm not suggesting that in 3 years McConkey's going to win the Triple Crown. And I don't want people to think that's what I'm saying. I hope they understand there's a little more nuance and subtlety to what I'm saying.
I think they do for the most part, Greg, but it's important to emphasize because, like, for example, you brought up Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we'll wrap up here shortly with it. But Titans fans hold that name in their head because John Robinson traded up to draft Des Fitzpatrick a couple of picks before Amon-Ra St. Brown went to the Detroit Lions. So they've always kind of had that in the back of their head. Oh, my God, we could have had Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that he would have been that here.
Right. And you look at someone like McConkey, and again, without getting into, every detail right now, to me, there was just no wasted motion or steps in his route running. He has great short area quickness and burst. He knows how to generate separation. You watch him and you go, wow, this guy knows how to run route. Route running is a very odd thing in terms of, when someone says, oh, he's a great route runner, you have to sort of define what that means. But this guy is a great route runner because he knows how to set up corner. There's 2 things you really want to do as a route runner as you get to the top of your stem. Okay, there's really 3 things that receivers have to do well if they're going to be really good. They have to be able to win off the line of scrimmage. They have to be able to separate at the top of the route stem, and they have to be able to win at the catch point. I mean, you got to be able to do that, or you're not going to be a good NFL receiver. So if we focus on the route stem part of it, you've got to get corners off their spot, or you have to get them to turn their body, because once they turn their body, they can only go in one way. Their body can't just physically, the body doesn't work like that, go in another direction, so you have to be able to do that. And McConkey's really good at that.
Somebody to keep an eye on as we all head to Indianapolis next week, where Greg and I will do this on person. We'll keep you updated with the day. We'll certainly be talking about offensive tackles while we're in Indianapolis, among several other prospects that we're keeping an eye on. Greg, it's always fun. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person, my brother, and we'll do it again next week.
Yeah, I get excited about this stuff, Buck. I hope people realize, I'm a little passionate about this stuff. I love it. It's different than the NFL season. It's a great change for me because NFL is a lot more scheme and tactics. Now it's more individual players, so it kind of rejuvenates me.
Yeah, you'd never know that you were excited by your tone. It's good. It's good. We're excited about it. Greg Cosell, appreciate your time, buddy. I'll talk to you in Indy.
Thanks, Buck. Appreciate it.